Man, that open never gets old. What is good, streaming people? Welcome to another edition of CBS Sports HQ. I'm Tommy Tran, getting you ready for another big night across high school football, including a look at the top games of the night and the players you should be looking out for. Let's kick things off right away with the top 10 excellent schools. And as we take a look, St. John Bosco remains up top, as well as Allen. But we have a matchup involving number 4 Miami Central, which we will get to as well. But you take a look at the list with Colquitt County representing Georgia, St. Francis Academy at 7, which we'll talk about out of Maryland as well, then St. Louis, Hawaii in the top 10. And for more, let's bring in the fellas. The trio here on CBS Sports HQ. Zack Poff, Mr. Everything out in the Golden State, joining us. Mr. MaxPreps, football editor, and Barton Simmons, 24/7 sports director of scouting. Gentlemen, good to have you. Hey, look, for now, we can finally say that we don't have a California or a West Coast bias, because we're going to go out in South Florida talking about a big showdown. Number 12, Carroll City. Number 4, Miami Central. Zack, I'll give you first word. Break this down for us. What are our expectations going into this one?
Yeah, this is a huge game, and to make it even sweeter, this is a big-time rivalry. These are two of the best high school football teams in South Florida, and a lot of people say the best talent actually comes from South Florida, and you got the two top teams along with Aquinas, obviously. But, district titles on the line tonight. Miami Central comes in 8-1. Their only loss came in 5 overtimes on the road in Washington, D.C. to number 3 St. John's, a game they could have won. And Carroll City is, they're 8-0 on the field. They had to forfeit their 2 first games this year, but they're one of the most dominant teams in high school football. You see they're holding opponents to under 5 points per game. And Daniel Richardson's been big time at quarterback, a transfer from Booker T. Washington, and Naquan Wright. They call him Bossman down there at Carroll City. He's one of the best running backs in the country. Defense is loaded with Jarvis Bramley, too. So this is going to be a fun game. I actually am leaning towards Miami Central, though. I think they're going to win this game. They just had kind of a tougher road, and I think that's going to prove well for them tonight.
Barton, you want to chime in a little bit in terms of the talent that we'll see on the field here?
Yeah, what's I love about this matchup and what's exciting about this game, particularly when you look at Miami Central, is there's not necessarily, and we talked about St. John Bosco and Modern Day and all these teams week in, week out, there's not necessarily that 5 or 6 elite 5-star level guys on this Miami Central team. They're loaded with youngsters. There are a lot of undersized, athletic kids, but Henry Gray is the one to keep an eye on. He's a 2020 kid. He's a cornerback. He's the kid on this roster that early on is trending to be one of the best in the country. Very instinctive, very athletic defensive back. And again, with this Miami Central team, it's just like they all have this in their DNA of playing hard, playing fast, playing physical. In a lot of cases, they outplay teams with more high-profile players, and that's one of the things I love about this team and why they're so fun to watch.
All right, so that's a look at Carroll City and Miami Central. Another game and another thing that we're looking at is the battle for the WCAC Top 25 matchup between number 3 St. John's out of D.C., number 23 DeMatha, so a beltway type of deal. Zack, break this one down for us, please.
Yeah, man, I've been saying the Trinity League is the SEC of high school football, so that would mean the WCAC is probably the Big 12 or the Big 10, because it's the second best conference in high school football. St. John's comes in undefeated. They've had arguably the toughest schedule, and things don't get any easier because DeMatha has been one of the hottest teams in high school football. They've won 6 in a row since their season opening loss to St. Thomas Aquinas, the top 15 team in the top 25. This is their last test before the playoffs begin. The winner of this game wins the WCAC regular season title, and there's a good chance these two will be seeing each other later on. And you get to look at some of the top players. DeMatha with Nick Ross and DeMarco Helms, 2 of the best defensive backs in high school football, will be going against Rakeem Jarrett, arguably the best receiver in 2020. He's having a big-time year. J. Maeva at quarterback's been a stud, and they also got Keelan Robinson in the backfield, and the defense has been lights out for St. John's this year. This is going to be a big one. It's a big test for St. John's, too, because they're still in contention to finish the year at number 1. So this is going to be a big one for the D.C. Power.
All right, so as we take a look, did you give us a winner here? Who do you like in this one, Zack?
I'm going to roll with the Cadets, man. I think St. John's is just playing too well. DeMatha is rolling at the right time, though, so I think it's going to be a closer game than some people might think. It's also in Maryland, so another road test for St. John's. But I think they're going to pull away late and win by at least 10.
Speaking of Maryland, a team in the top 10 that we have not been talking about very much, St. Francis Academy. What season have they had so far? What more can you tell us about them?
You know, they're just in a tough spot this year because teams are afraid to play them, so they haven't had, you know, the national schedule. And the one team they did play, Lightning affected it, so it got called in the third quarter against Billy Power and top 20 team St. Joseph's Prep. So I think they can hang with anyone, man, and it'd be nice to see them play a team like IMG Academy. So hopefully that could, you know, maybe happen later in the year because both these teams will not be playoff eligible. But, you know, they're loaded on defense, you know. Damon Clowney, the cousin of Jadeveon Clowney, he's been an absolute stud this year. They got Aaron Willis at linebacker, Chris Braswell on the D end. Offense has been nice. I mean, talent for talent, they're as good as anyone in the country. They just don't stack up when it comes to the national schedule, so that's going to keep them out from most likely being a top 3 or 4 team at the end of the year.
All right, so that's the latest on St. Francis out of Maryland. Let's take a look at the scoreboard to get everybody prepped and ready to go in terms of what's happening this weekend involving the top 5 high schools. St. John Bosco at Servite, Allen, Texas, and McKinney Boyd. We talked about Carroll City and Miami Central, and then there's Mater Dei against Orange Lutheran. In terms of the excellent schools from 11 to 20, here's a look at the schools and the list that we have going on right now. I want to focus on number 16, Rome out of Georgia, and we'll bring in both gentlemen into the fold and talking about this 9-0 team. Zach, I'll start with you first. This team, we haven't talked about them really all year. What's making them special and why people should be paying attention?
Yeah, anytime you're in the top 10 when it comes to, you know, longest active winning streaks, you're doing something well. Rome is tied for 10th right now. They've won 36 consecutive games, and they've been rolling this year, and they really flexed their muscle early in the year because I was one of them. I had Marietta as one of the most hyped teams, and they put a 51 spot on them and beat them 51-41. And they've been rolling since then, and one of the main reasons why is because of their stud running back, 2019 NC State commit Jemias Griffin. Now, you know you're doing things well if you're breaking Herschel Walker records in Georgia high school football history, and he did that a couple weeks ago when it comes to touchdowns. So, you know, Jameis has been eating this year, and, you know, as I always say, he's been super saucy.
Yeah, Jemias Griffin is an exciting player to watch. Been a big-time senior riser for us and someone we're going to take a look at from a ranking standpoint. But I tell you, he's a product of the offensive line, too. It's a program with a great culture on the offensive line. Those guys play really physical football. They're going to come right at you and make you decide if you're tough enough. And oftentimes teams aren't. And I'll tell you, another guy that's someone to keep an eye on is the quarterback, Knox Kadum, who's the type of player that's got a lot of the mid-major sort of group of 5 offers right now. But don't be surprised late in the process, after the early signing period, as a bunch of big schools are looking for a quarterback, moving a little further down their list, if that Knox Kadum offer doesn't start coming from some bigger programs, athletic enough, really smooth feel for the game, accurate, makes big plays when it matters. So that's a team with a big-time running back, a quarterback you can really trust, and an offensive line that's just stacked. That's a pretty good recipe right there.
All right, so that's a look at the team and the players involved with Rome out of Georgia. So let's finish things up with our excellent 25 and a look at the final 5, 21 through 25. And we've talked about DeMatha a little bit, Coleraine, as well as University Lab so far. Folsom, by the way, Jake Browning, we've talked about him just a little bit here. That's his old school out in California. How about the notable games that we still have going on outside of the ones that we have already talked about so far here on CBS Sports HQ? St. Louis out of Hawaii. Zach, a little bit here about St. Louis. Of course, winner advances to the D1 Open Division playoffs. Who do you like in this game and why?
I got to go St. Louis, man, but Punahou played them tough this year. You know, these are big-time 808 rivals, so they're very familiar with each other. Punahou only lost by 7. That was the tightest game St. Louis has been in this year. But I'm going to roll with St. Louis, man. Fatui Tuateli and Jordan Botello on defense. They're just too good, and Jaden Delores slinging the rock. I'm going St. Louis, and it's tough because the loser goes home and won't even have a chance to win a D1 title, but I think St. Louis will three-peat this year. All
right, good stuff. The other two involving number 14, Warren Central, and number 9, Colquitt County. All right, good first segment, gentlemen. When we come back, regional breakdowns and the recruiting storylines as well. We'll see you soon. Everybody, don't go anywhere. We'll be back. You are streaming CBS Sports HQ with the MaxPreps show here, and here's a look at the West Coast breakdown. It is I mean, heavy hitting St. John Bosco, Mater Dei, Corona Centennial, St. Louis, and De La Salle. Let me welcome in Mr. Everything again, Zack Poff. By the way, we will have Barton Simmons later on in the recruiting storylines. Zack, you got a little bit of a beef, I guess, a little bit on Twitter about Corona Centennial. Although, if they were watching this at the end, we did touch upon it. So another reason to watch the entire program here on CBS Sports HQ. But with that being said, what do we know about the Corona and Centennial? Let us know a little bit about how they can hang with some of the big cats here.
Hey, Tommy, I think they took it personal because they played yesterday, and they had 77 points before halftime. So I think they took it personal that I didn't mention them by name. Corona Centennial, you guys are as good as anybody in high school football, and especially Southern California. And the real test for them is really going to come in the the playoffs that start next week in the CIF Open Division Southern Section. So that's going to be a big-time playoff test. They're going to have to play either, a team like Mater Dei and then the St. John Bosco in the semifinals and finals. So they still have a chance to prove they're the #1 team in high school football if they can run the table. And if they do all that, they're going to have to play De La Salle. But, when it comes to studs, they got a bunch of them. Gary Bryant Jr., one of the best, shiftiest wide receivers in the 2020 class. And the thing that really makes Centennial as good as anyone this year, though, has been on the other side of the ball on defense. Drake Jackson, one of the best defensive ends. And this is probably the best defense Corona Centennial has had under Matt Logan since 2008, when they had two guys that played in the NFL, one currently, Vontaze Perfect, and Will Sutton. So this defense is as good as that defense, and that really says a lot because this team's averaging over 50 points per game on offense, too.
All right, 84-14, by the way. Corona getting it done against Roosevelt in their last game. So that's the West Coast. How about the Southwest as we take a look at that region? Allen, North Shore, Duncanville, all from Texas, of course. Just focusing a little bit on Duncanville here, averaging 54 points per game and allowing just 4.5. Simply amazing, and we know that area, especially in the state of Texas, it is super stacked. In terms of the Southeast, we were talking about Miami Central. We mentioned IMG Academy before. St. Thomas Aquinas, Carroll City, as we mentioned, and Colquitt County again. That will be an interesting race to see who ends up #1 in that region. Moving on to the Midwest, this is something that we'll deep dive into a little bit more here as we take a look at the top 5 in that region. Warren Central, Archbishop Hoban, and then there's Colerain right there. So Colerain out of Ohio, trying to win the first state title since 2004. What are the chances, Zach, that they're able to pull that off?
Man, Ohio Division I playoffs are super tough. So, even if I gave them maybe like a 35%, that'd be pretty good odds for them. So that's what I'm going to roll with. They're playing as well as anybody, not just in Ohio, but in high school football. They're 9-0 this year. They're running the ball very well. They're playing good defense. They've done a great job under head coach Bolden. So, they're 9-0, a chance to finish the year 10-0 before they head into the playoffs. But they're going to have to deal with some other big-time teams. Pickerington Central, the defending state champs, they've lost a couple of games as of late, but they still got Demetric Crenshaw at quarterback. And then obviously Mentor is going to be right there. And St. X is always big time in the playoffs. Even if they don't have the best regular season, they're always right there. But if I had to pick one favorite right now, I'm going to lean towards Colerain because of the way they're playing all throughout the season. And they're going to beat Lakota West tonight and win their 74th consecutive Conference League game, which is pretty impressive. And they've won 19 consecutive Greater Miami conferences, so that's pretty impressive also. All
right, so that's a look at the Midwest, and we wrap things up in the Northeast. And we mentioned it before, the battle for the WCAC features 2 of the teams on this list, St. John's and DeMatha. So great stuff going on. We've also talked about Bergen Catholic and St. Joseph's Prep as well here on CBS Sports HQ. More coming up. Barton Simmons with the recruiting storyline. Zach, thank you very much, and we'll bring you back to wrap things up. These are the top recruiting storylines. Georgia loses the #2 running back in the class of 2019. Fellow SEC school LSU lands top 15 wide receiver in the class of 2020. Scott Frost snagging a top player in the state of Washington, and Alabama picks up 6th defensive end commit right there. So those are the storylines, and we break them down with Barton Simmons, 24/7 Sports Director of Scouting. And so, look, it's not always, what is it, caviar dreams or champagne wishes and caviar dreams up there at the penthouse, and that's what Kirby Smart has enjoyed in terms of his recruiting classes here. But John Emery decommits from UGA. Barton, what more can you tell us about him?
Well, it's their second 5-star decommit in about the last month, and that's never good. And this is certainly one they wanted, and this is a kid who looked to be continuing an unbelievable pipeline of running backs to Georgia, but he is out of the state of Louisiana. And when you are recruiting 5 stars, particularly 5 stars in other folks' backyard, there's always going to be a chance that you lose them, because those guys are going to get recruited heavily by the top programs in the country. And oh, by the way, LSU's having a pretty good year this year themselves. So I do think that's a team to watch now, is LSU and the recruitment of John Emery. Georgia will continue to swing and battle. I think he's going to take some visits, but this was a little bit of a surprise, and yet never a shock to see a Louisiana kid to get a little cold feet going away from home. Those guys always are so hard to get out of the state. LSU's always a threat for them.
Speaking of LSU, Ed Orgeron and Go Tigers getting Kayshon Boutte, a 2020 guy. What do we know about him? And boy, this might be a big get down in Baton Rouge.
Well, he's the #1 player in the state of Louisiana for the class of 2020, and that's a great start. That's what Ed Orgeron wants. He wants to really lock down the state. He wants to dominate that state, and if you do, you got a pretty good chance. And when you look at what they've done in 2019, they've got 5 of the top 7 recruits committed in the state of Louisiana, and that doesn't include John Emery, who may end up at LSU. That doesn't include Ismail Sopcher, who may end up at LSU. So there's a chance they could get 7 of the top 7, and now they've started out getting the #1 player in 2020. And the rest of the rankings, there could be some shifts. There could be some evolution involved in the state rankings, but we know Kayshon Boutte was going to be among the highest rated, and certainly he's got a good case to hang on to the #1 spot as well. So LSU, building on the momentum that they've created with their really impressive play on the field this fall, recruiting going just like Ed Orgeron likes it, particularly in state.
All right, so over at Nebraska, Scott Frost finally getting a win for the Cornhuskers. That rebuild in full effect out there. We know he can go out to the West Coast and get kids. Adrian Martinez out in California, this time going to the Pacific Northwest down in Washington, picking up a kid. Tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, Darian Chase is a kid that I remember first seeing him a couple years ago at a 7-on-7 event in Las Vegas, and the way that kid competes is awesome. I mean, he plays both sides of the football. He's a safety, he's a wide receiver, he's physical, he's tough, he's got great ball skills, really attacks the football, and has a great competitive temperament and demeanor. And so there's that side of it. 4-star kid, elite player, one of the best players in the state of Washington. And so you're just getting a good football player. But the other side of this is everyone wants to talk about the issues that Nebraska has recruiting nationally, and that they don't have the same footprint, and it's tough to get people to Lincoln. I think this is a really strong answer here to those doubters from Scott Frost. We know what he's built in terms of ties to the state of Florida. He's been able to recruit. Nebraska, even under Mike Riley, was able to recruit well in the state of California. Now he's heading all the way up to Washington to get one of the best players in that state, maybe the best player in that state. He's got that kind of upside. So it's a really nice get, both as a statement and just as a talent.
So we know the footprint for Alabama, and my goodness, they're going out to South Florida to get this next story and this next kid. Braylon Ingram commits to Crimson Tide. And why go to Alabama and Bryant-Denny Stadium maybe over some of the other big programs regionally here for Mr. Ingram?
Well, Alabama's had some really good success lately recruiting South Florida. They just go in there and they pick out a couple guys every year. Last year, Pat Surtain Jr. was the big one, but it happens year after year. And the graphic you're seeing on your screen right now, I think, is probably the biggest story here of all, is what Braylon Ingram brings to the Alabama defensive front. I mean, this class is vintage Alabama. Big bodies, athletic kids, extremely physical. And St. Thomas Aquinas is a powerhouse national program. Folks that are watching this show right now have probably seen St. Thomas Aquinas on television. And if you've watched St. Thomas Aquinas, you've seen Braylon Ingram flash. He's the type of kid you can't miss. He makes those plays. He's versatile along the defensive front, but he's very athletic along the edge. And he joins a class along that defensive front that's just got some massive, physical, impressive kids. And this is, for a program that's really built itself on defensive line talent, and Nick Saban has really sort of made that the centerpiece of his program. This is a class that's going to uphold that tradition very well, and Braylon Ingram's a big part of that.
All right, so that's a look at the recruiting storylines. Great stuff from Barton. Let's welcome back in Zack Poff there from MaxPreps and take a look at the top 5 scoreboard as we wrap things up here. Nearing Halloween as we get ready for some of the big schools and the big games. Zack, send us away with one more nugget in terms of this top 5 high school scoreboard and something that we have not yet talked about in this show.
I got to talk SoCal then. Modern day Orange Lutheran, you know, Ryan Helinski gets a crack at arguably the best secondary in high school football. Should be a fun one, but I think Modern Day is going to win big. And, you know, they had a big win last week against J. Sarah Catholic. I think they're going to win another one, head into the playoffs red hot.
All right. Great stuff as always. For Zack Poff and Barton Simmons, I'm Tommy Tran. Thanks for joining us here in CBS Sports HQ. Once again, enjoy those games on the high school football gridiron, and we will see you next Friday. And speaking of 24/7 Sports and Barton Simmons, those guys always do a great job. Also talking about the college game, it's the Week 9 locks. Barton, Chip, Tom, and the rest of the guys getting you ready for the weekend. Have a good one, everybody. We'll see you next week.